What's up, guys? I'm over here in my office and I'm going to read a question, which is why I was reaching behind my camera here. So I got a question yesterday on one of the videos that I did. And the last video I did was about why I only eat 1 or 2 times a day. And one of the reasons why I only eat 1 or 2 times a day is so that I can live in a low insulin environment. All right, I want to keep my insulin levels low so that I can keep my insulin sensitivity high, so that I can remain lean, so that my brain works better, so that I have less inflammation throughout my body, right? Jonathan Medros actually had a really good question for me. And he said, I have a question. I thought that insulin was what the biggest bodybuilders started injecting around the time of Dorian Yates to really get freaky results. So in my mind, as a natural, I thought that if I have an insulin spike directly after the workout via simple carb consumption, I could make my body more anabolic. Was I totally wrong? And then I made some comments below and talked a little bit about this, but I want you guys to understand that this is a really complicated issue, right? Or it's actually very simple, but it becomes complicated because the science itself is complicated, and it's also complicated by this story that we're all living called bodybuilding, because it is a story. A lot of these things get passed down from locker room to locker room, from person to person, and it becomes almost more folklore than it is science. So let's try to parse out where the science is and where the story is. All right. So he mentioned that he thought that this started around the time of Dorian Yates. It actually didn't. It started around 1981. A bodybuilder named Tim Belknap came on the national stage. Tim was a diabetic and he had a great physique, but he credited his use of insulin with controlling his diabetes, with managing his blood sugar, and with building his physique. So bodybuilders being bodybuilders, everybody took notice of this and they started telling themselves, maybe I should try out this insulin thing, right? Now, fast forward a few years, a guy named Dan Duchaine. Dan Duchaine was like the renegade biohacker of the time, right? He had some of the top bodybuilders in the world working with him. And he was one of the first guys who actually came up with a ketogenic diet for bodybuilders. He actually created the first diet that wasn't for losing weight. It was for building muscle. And it's outlined in a book called The Underground Body Opus. Now, this was like the original ketogenic diet. He had his athletes on like something like 80 to 90% fat, like 10% protein. And they were, most of that fat was coming from oils, coconut oil, things like that. And that's all they were consuming throughout the time. And then on Fridays, he would load them up with like shit tons of carbohydrates. I can't remember the exact numbers, but he'd have them like eating carbohydrates throughout the day on Friday and then going back into that low carbohydrate state to get back into ketosis. And this is kind of where cyclic ketogenic dieting started, right? Through this guy, Dan Duchaine. Dan Duchaine had some other impacts on bodybuilding. He was one of the original steroid gurus, and he ran in a steroid lab, an underground steroid lab back, I think it was down in Mexico. And he authored a book, I think it was called like the underground steroid, underground steroid book or something like that. I can't remember the exact name. I'll see if I can find links or anything like that for his bio. I will link Underground Body Opus down below. But he also started experimenting with insulin, injecting his athletes with insulin. And he was doing this mainly to see if he could create an instant state of ketosis by getting the blood sugar out of the bloodstream, okay? Fast forward a few more years, another guy named Milo Sarchev, who was actually a very famous bodybuilder at the time. I don't know that many people today know of him, but really famous bodybuilder at the time. He had a gym over here in Southern California, and he'd bring athletes out to live like close to the gym, and he would watch everything they did. But one of the things he did was he would have his athletes inject themselves with a pretty good sized dose of insulin prior to a workout. And then throughout the workout, what he would do was he had these things that were called magic shakes, and they would contain something like like 60 to 80 grams of carbohydrate, like a shit ton of protein, and a bunch of amino acids that he would put in there. And so he'd have them drink one shake prior to the workout, one shake during the workout, and then finish another shake before the end of the workout. So before the end of the workout, these guys are consuming like close to 1,000 calories and you know, a bunch of carbs. Now, here's the thing. Okay, insulin, injectable insulin is dangerous. There is no other thing that bodybuilders do that can kill them. Okay, you can inject yourself with all of the testosterone in the world. Maybe if you're doing something like T3, the thyroid hormone, if you take too much of that, that can kill you. If you take too much of clenbuterol, that could kill you. But testosterone, you can inject as much as you want. You're not going to overdose. Okay, but with insulin, if you get the math off just a little bit, you can die, or you can become brain damaged. And I'll get into why in a second, but I want you guys to understand this so you don't try that at home. It's dumb if you try it. This is idiotic, okay? Now, in order to understand insulin, the reason why they were doing this, you have to understand how insulin works, okay? Insulin's job in the body is to regulate blood sugar, okay? That's his main job, all right? So your body likes to keep things in a baseline level. And anytime you go outside of the baseline level, one of the functions of your body is to bring it back to baseline, right? Because your body doesn't want to get swollen, jacked. It also doesn't want to, get super lean. It wants to survive. So whenever you're eating a bunch of protein or carbohydrate, whenever you're eating protein or carbohydrate in general, your glucose starts to go up. All right, and a lot of people don't understand this. Protein actually can get converted to glucose in the bloodstream via a process called gluconeogenesis. Right, so whenever you're eating protein and carbohydrate, your glucose levels in your bloodstream, they go up, and whenever your glucose levels in your bloodstream go up, they above about 100 milligrams per deciliter, then your pancreas starts to secrete insulin. And insulin's job is to, again, bring that level down under 100 milligrams per deciliter, somewhere between 80 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. And diabetics, for instance, they don't respond to their own insulin anymore. So that's one of the... They can't regulate their own blood sugar. So that's one of the reasons why they take exogenous insulin, right? Because they have extra blood sugar going around their bloodstream, and they need to inject themselves with insulin to bring that blood sugar back down to baseline. With the shakes that I just mentioned, the high amount of carbohydrate that they were taking in, the reason why there was so much carbohydrate in the shakes and was simply for one reason, and that was to keep these athletes alive after they injected insulin. Right, the mechanism for building muscle that was in them was the protein and the amino acids that was in the shakes. It wasn't the carbohydrate, right? And the carbohydrate wasn't inducing an insulin spike. They were taking the insulin in order to be able to handle that much, in order to get that shuttling effect, right? Where they'd be able to shuttle nutrients into their muscle cells. But the carbohydrate wasn't there to spike their insulin. They were doing that exogenously. The carbohydrate was only there to keep them alive, right? And that's because insulin, when it's taking your blood sugar out of your bloodstream, it has one of three destinations. It has your muscle cells, it has your liver cells, and it has your adipose tissue cells. So the thing you have to understand here is that part of glucose's job in the bloodstream is to fuel your brain, right? That's the main reason why we have blood sugar, is to fuel our brains and fuel the rest of our body functions. If you inject too much insulin and your blood sugar shoots way down, your brain gets starved of blood sugar and then you die, or you become a vegetable. Right, and that's why insulin is so dangerous in and of itself. And again, that's why those carbohydrates were in the shakes. So getting back to Jonathan's question here, because I know that was a long-winded first part of this answer. So in my mind as a natural, I thought that if I have an insulin spike directly after a workout via simple carb consumption, I could make my body more anabolic. Now, this concept actually, like many things in natural bodybuilding, comes from the enhanced side, right? Because these guys were doing this over here, a lot of natural bodybuilders thought that they needed to spike their insulin after their training sessions. And I was in the same boat. If you watch some of my earlier videos, I definitely recommended doing post-workout carbs. I don't anymore. And here's why, right? You are not injecting exogenous insulin into your body. So eating a high amount of carbohydrates after your workout is not necessarily necessary for you to build muscle, and you're not necessarily going to be able to handle that high amount of carbohydrates without simply just fueling your adipose tissue, right? Your body can only handle a certain amount of carbohydrates at one time, right? And if you do that over and over again, another factor that happens by spiking your insulin, if you continually bombard your muscle cells with insulin, is they become less sensitive to the hormone. So the hormone ceases to do its job like it should. So rather than storing in your muscle cells or even your liver cells, your liver actually has a little bit of storage space in it for glycogen. You begin fueling your adipose tissue as opposed to fueling your muscle cells, which is why you're taking the carbs in the first place. And if you do this over a really long period of time, you do it again and again. This is why I don't recommend bulking, high carbohydrate bulking diets over long periods of time. You can become pre-diabetic or diabetic because you're continually exposing yourself to insulin. The mechanism for building muscle is amino acids. Now, do you need insulin to get amino acids into your muscles? Yes, absolutely. We all need insulin, right? We all need insulin. Anybody who says they don't need insulin, I mean, it's dumb. Every living thing on this planet has insulin. It's actually the oldest hormone. That's what they're finding through our evolutionary history. That was the first hormone that came about, and insulin serves a very vital function in our body. And if it stops secreting, or if your body stops responding to it, that's again where diabetes comes in and a whole host of other issues. But you don't need a carbohydrate spike in order to, or you don't need carbohydrates in order to induce a spike of insulin, right? And there's a few reasons behind this. One, protein is insulinogenic, right? So you're going to be secreting insulin, right? And protein also turns into glucose. So even if you don't have a lot of carbohydrates in your diet, you're still going to be storing liver glycogen, right? And muscle glycogen. So you'll still have glycogen in your body, even if you're on a very strict ketogenic diet, because the protein you eat, which again shouldn't be high on a ketogenic diet, the protein you eat will create glycogen or become glycogen in your muscles eventually. Two, so you're going to be secreting insulin regardless of whether or not you're eating carbohydrates. Two, again, if you're natural, you're not getting that exogenous insulin injection to be able to handle that amount of carbohydrates, right? And again, it's dumb if you do that because, like I said, you could become brain dead or dead. But if you're not injecting yourself with exogenous insulin, you're not able to handle, 150, 200, 300 grams of carbohydrates at a time, right? Without putting some fat storage on. You're going to be fueling your fat stores, not your muscle cells. And three, again, if you have the adequate amino acids in your bloodstream and you're eating enough protein, and if you're in ketosis, you're fueling yourself or supplementing with some essential amino acids or branched chain amino acids on a low level basis, then you'll have the building blocks to build muscle. And nowhere in that equation is eating carbohydrates necessary to spike your insulin to facilitate that process. So though insulin is necessary in order for you to build muscle, you don't need to be eating a lot of carbohydrates in order to induce that insulin spike. It's just not necessary. It's something that comes over from this steroid side of things that unfortunately has been mistranslated into something for the natural bodybuilder. All right. I know that that's very complicated, and again, there's a lot of science and a lot of moving parts and a lot of conflagrations between the story of bodybuilding and the actual science behind it. And I'm probably not the best verbal communicator in the world, though I try here on this channel. So if you have any questions on what I just said, put them below and I'll respond to you. I'm also giving a live webinar tomorrow. And if you want, you could sign up for that and you can ask me questions live. It's going to be tomorrow, which is Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you're watching this like 3 months from now, we give webinars every week. So if you're watching this 3 months from now, still click on that link and you'll be able to register for our latest webinar. So that's that, guys. Oh, and amazing content up there on warriorsolagogi.com. That's AGOGE.com. I just interviewed Chris Bell, the creator of Bigger, Stronger, Faster. You're going to want to see that interview. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace. And don't inject insulin.